My name is Rebecca Miller, and I just turned 32. I never expected my birthday to turn into a nightmare because of a box of chocolates. When my dad sent me that expensive gourmet collection, I thought it was finally a genuine gesture from him. Our relationship had always been complicated, but chocolates seemed safe. So when my brother Ethan and his 6-year-old son Noah came over, I happily gave them the entire box. I had no idea those chocolates would change everything. If you are watching this right now, let me know where you are from in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to follow my journey through this family nightmare. Growing up in a middle-class American household in Boston had its moments of joy, but the undercurrent of tension was always present. My father, Harold Miller, was the kind of man who measured love in dollars and cents. He worked as a pharmaceutical sales representative, which meant he traveled often, and when he was home, his presence filled every room with an unpredictable energy that kept us walking on eggshells. My mother, Marion, did her best to create a buffer between his controlling nature and us kids. She was soft-spoken and kind, the complete opposite of my father. They argued constantly behind closed doors, but maintained a facade of normalcy when anyone was watching. That facade finally cracked when I was 14 and my brother Ethan was 11. The divorce was messy and painful, with my father using every trick in the book to punish my mother for leaving. The worst punishment came when he won primary custody of us. Mom moved to Arizona to be with her sister, promising to fight for us, but the legal battles drained her financially and emotionally. Eventually, the visits became phone calls, and the phone calls became birthday cards. I never blamed her, though. I saw what my father did to her spirit. My father controlled everything: the clothes we wore, the friends we had, even the college I would eventually attend. Gifts were never just gifts with Harold Miller. They were currency, leverage for future compliance. Every birthday present came with strings attached. Every Christmas gift with an invisible bill that would come due when he needed something. Despite the suffocating environment, I managed to build my own identity. I studied graphic design at the State University, which was close enough to home to appease my father, but far enough to taste independence. Those 4 years taught me more about myself than anything before. I learned that I had a voice, opinions, and the courage to express them, at least outside of my father's shadow. After graduation, I landed a job with a marketing firm in Chicago. Moving 2 hours away from my hometown was the first real act of independence I had ever taken. My father called it betrayal. I called it survival. My younger brother Ethan had a different path. He married his high school sweetheart, Jessica, right after they both graduated college. They had a beautiful son, Noah, and for 3 years, they were blissfully happy. Then tragedy struck. Jessica was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia, and within 6 months, she was gone. Ethan was left alone with a 3-year-old son and a mountain of medical debt. That was when our father swooped in, offering financial help that Ethan desperately needed. I watched history repeat itself as my brother became entangled in our father's web of obligation and control. But unlike me, Ethan had Noah to consider. He couldn't just walk away from the help, no matter what conditions came attached. I became fiercely protective of them both. Every weekend I could manage, I drove back to Boston to spend time with them. I took Noah for outings to give Ethan a break, brought groceries when I knew money was tight, and most importantly, provided a buffer between them and our father when his demands became too much. Our father never understood the concept of boundaries. He would show up unannounced at Ethan's apartment, criticize his parenting skills, and offer unsolicited financial advice that always ended with Ethan feeling inadequate. When I tried to intervene, he would dismiss me, saying, "I am helping them in ways you cannot understand." Birthdays were particularly stressful. Each year, my father would make a big show of whatever gift he had selected, making sure everyone knew just how generous and thoughtful he was. The gifts were always expensive but rarely personal. Last year, he gave me a diamond bracelet that I had never expressed any interest in. When I gently suggested that I preferred simpler jewelry, he accused me of being ungrateful. The bracelet remained in its box, tucked away in my dresser drawer. My life in Chicago became my sanctuary. I had built a small but loyal circle of friends, advanced to a senior design position at my firm, and even started dating again after a series of failed relationships. My apartment was modestly furnished, but entirely mine. A space untainted by my father's influence. From the artwork on the walls to the color of my kitchen cabinets, every choice was mine alone. The distance helped me maintain a civil relationship with my father. Our phone calls were brief and superficial. I avoided discussing anything meaningful, steering conversations towards safe topics like the weather or general news. It wasn't ideal, but it was manageable. I had learned that engaging with him on deeper levels inevitably led to conflict. As my 32nd birthday approached, I expected the usual impersonal gift and obligatory dinner if he happened to be in town. What I didn't expect was how a simple box of chocolates would expose the true nature of our family dynamic and force me to confront truths I had been avoiding for years. My 32nd birthday fell on a Saturday in April, which seemed like perfect timing for a small celebration. I had planned a low-key weekend for myself, starting with a morning yoga class, followed by brunch with friends, and ending with a movie night at home. Nothing extravagant, just simple pleasures that made me happy. After years of elaborate but emotionally hollow birthday celebrations orchestrated by my father, I had learned to appreciate authenticity over grandeur. The day began exactly as planned. The yoga class left me feeling centered and refreshed, and brunch with my two closest Chicago friends, Melissa and Jared, was filled with laughter and mimosas. They gave me a set of professional-grade sketching pencils, remembering how I had mentioned wanting to get back into drawing as a personal creative outlet outside of my computer-based graphic design work. The gift was modest in price but thoughtful in nature, the exact opposite of what I had grown accustomed to receiving from my father. When I returned to my apartment around 2 in the afternoon, I was surprised to find a delivery notice on my door. The concierge at the front desk handed me a medium-sized package wrapped in elegant silver paper with a small card attached. I immediately recognized my father's handwriting on the envelope. Back in my apartment, I placed the package on my coffee table and stared at it for several minutes before opening the card. Inside was a brief message: "Happy birthday, Rebecca. Enjoy these sweet treats. Love, Dad." The word love made me pause. It wasn't a term he used casually or often. With mixture of curiosity and caution, I unwrapped the package to find an ornate wooden box with gold lettering, La Maison du Chocolat. Inside were rows of meticulously arranged gourmet chocolates, each one looking like a tiny work of art. There must have been at least 50 pieces, ranging from dark chocolate ganaches to milk chocolate pralines. According to the small booklet tucked inside the lid, this was their grand collection, imported directly from Paris. I was genuinely surprised. The gift was expensive, which was typical of my father, but it also showed a level of thoughtfulness I hadn't experienced from him before. Chocolates had been my favorite indulgence since childhood, something I had mentioned to him years ago, but assumed he had forgotten. The fact that he remembered made me wonder if perhaps he was making an effort to reconnect in a more meaningful way. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to hope that this might represent a turning point in our relationship. Maybe advancing age had softened him, or perhaps he was finally recognizing the damage his controlling behavior had caused. Whatever the reason, I felt a small crack forming in the protective wall I had built around my heart. I was about to sample one of the chocolates when my phone rang. It was Ethan, his voice tight with stress. His regular babysitter had canceled at the last minute, and he was supposed to cover a shift at the restaurant where he worked as a manager. He apologized profusely for calling on my birthday, but he sounded desperate. Without hesitation, I invited them both over. I could pick up some groceries and make a simple birthday dinner for the three of us. Noah always enjoyed visiting his aunt in the big city, and I welcomed the company. Ethan protested weakly, not wanting to impose, but I could hear the relief in his voice when he finally accepted. They arrived 2 hours later. Noah bursting through my door with the boundless energy of a 6-year-old and a slightly crooked handmade birthday card. Ethan followed, looking exhausted but grateful, carrying a small bakery box containing my favorite lemon cupcakes from a local Boston bakery. He must have driven directly to the bakery before heading to Chicago, knowing how much I love them. Noah's eyes widened when he spotted the box of chocolates on the coffee table. As a first grader with a serious sweet tooth, fine chocolates represented the ultimate treasure. He approached the box reverently, asking if they were real chocolates like in the movies. His expression of wonder was so pure that I found myself laughing. In that moment, I made an impulsive decision. I told Noah that he and his dad could have the entire box. After all, what was I going to do with 50 gourmet chocolates anyway? The joy on his face was worth any price, and Ethan looked like he could use something sweet in his life as well. I did suggest they save some for later, knowing how quickly sugar affected Noah's energy levels. While I prepared a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, Noah's favorite, Ethan and Noah each selected a chocolate from the box. Noah chose a milk chocolate shaped like a seashell, while Ethan went for a dark chocolate square dusted with gold. They both declared them the best chocolates they'd ever tasted. Throughout dinner, Noah regaled me with stories from school, complete with dramatic reenactments that had us all laughing. Ethan gradually relaxed, the tension easing from his shoulders as the evening progressed. When Noah asked if he could have another chocolate for dessert, I nodded, watching as he carefully examined each piece before making his selection. After dinner, we played board games until Noah began to yawn. Ethan decided they should head home before it got too late, despite my offer to let them stay the night. Before leaving, Ethan insisted that I keep some of the chocolates, but I waved him off. Seeing the happiness on their faces had been gift enough for me. Besides, I reasoned, I had the cupcakes for my own sweet treat. As I hugged them goodbye at the door, Noah clutching the chocolate box proudly, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. Despite the complicated family dynamics and ever-present shadow of my father, moments like these reminded me that love could be simple and straightforward. No strings attached, no obligations. Just genuine connection. I fell asleep that night feeling that everything in my life was in perfect balance. I had my independence, my career, and the close relationship with my brother and nephew that I cherished. Even the unexpected gift from my father seemed like a positive sign that perhaps things were changing for the better. I had no idea that by giving away those chocolates, I had set in motion a chain of events that would shatter that illusion of balance and force me to confront the darkest aspects of my family history. Sunday morning greeted me with gentle spring sunshine filtering through my curtains. I stretched lazily in bed, enjoying the rare luxury of having nowhere to be and nothing urgent to do. My birthday celebration had been perfect in its simplicity, and I felt refreshed despite the late night with Ethan and Noah. After a leisurely shower, I made myself a cup of coffee and settled on my small balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city was coming alive below me, but from 10 stories up, the hustle and bustle seemed distant and peaceful. I was midway through planning my week when my phone rang, displaying my father's name on the screen. This was unusual. My father rarely called on Sundays, and never this early. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. Perhaps he was calling to ensure I had received his gift. I answered with a casual hello and was greeted by my father's booming voice. He exchanged the briefest of pleasantries before getting straight to the point, asking if I had enjoyed the chocolates. There was an eagerness in his tone that I found slightly off-putting, as if my enjoyment of his gift was of critical importance. Keeping my voice light, I thanked him for remembering my love of chocolates and then casually mentioned that I had actually given the box to Ethan and Noah when they visited yesterday. I explained that Noah had been particularly excited about them and that it had seemed like the perfect treat to share with them. The silence that followed was so complete that for a moment, I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard my father inhale sharply, and his voice returned with an intensity that made me flinch. "Are you kidding me?" He exploded, each word sharp as a knife. Please tell me this is some kind of sick joke, Rebecca. I pulled the phone away from my ear, stunned by the ferocity of his reaction. When I cautiously returned it, he was still yelling, his words tumbling over each other in a frantic stream. I caught phrases like, "How could you be so irresponsible?" and "Do you have any idea what you've done?" that sent ice through my veins. Dad. I interrupted, my heart beginning to race. What's going on? They're just chocolates. Just chocolates? He sputtered, his voice rising even higher. Those weren't just chocolates, you idiot. They were special. They had my heart medication inside them. The world seemed to tilt beneath me. My father's words made no sense, yet the panic in his voice was undeniable. I gripped the balcony railing to steady myself as he continued his tirade. He explained in fragmented sentences that his doctor had recently prescribed a new, expensive heart medication that wasn't covered by his insurance. He had found a pharmacy in Mexico that sold it at a fraction of the cost. But bringing prescription drugs across the border without proper documentation was illegal. So he had devised what he thought was a clever plan: hollow out gourmet chocolates, place the pills inside, and reseal them. The chocolates had never been intended for consumption. They were merely a disguise, a smuggling vehicle. He had shipped them to me temporarily because he was being audited by the IRS and didn't want any suspicious packages arriving at his address. His plan had been to retrieve the box when he visited me next week. As the full implication of his words sank in, a wave of terror washed over me. Noah had eaten those chocolates. A 6-year-old child had potentially consumed powerful heart medication meant for a grown man. The thought made me physically ill. Where are they now? My father demanded. How many did they eat? I couldn't answer with certainty. I remembered Noah eating one during dinner and taking another for dessert. Ethan had one as well. But after we finished playing board games and they left, they took the entire box home with them. For all I knew, Noah could have eaten more this morning. I need to go, I said, already moving toward my bedroom to change. I need to call Ethan right now. Don't call him, my father ordered. I'll drive to his place immediately. Meet me there. And Rebecca? He added, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper, not a word about the medication to anyone. Do you understand? Before I could respond, he hung up. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing through the implications. My father was more concerned about the illegality of his actions than the potential danger to his own grandson. The realization was like a physical blow. With shaking hands, I tried calling Ethan's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text urging him to call me immediately, then threw on the first clothes I could find and grabbed my car keys. The drive from Chicago to Boston would take me nearly 10 hours, but I couldn't just sit and wait. As I started my car, I tried Ethan again, praying that he and Noah were okay. The 2-hour journey to Boston was the longest of my life. Every red light felt like an eternity, every slow driver an insurmountable obstacle. I called Ethan repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic messages. When he finally texted back, it was just 2 words, "At park." At least they were alive, I thought, pressing my foot harder on the accelerator. But were they okay? How many of those chocolates had Noah eaten? What would the medication do to his small body? The questions tortured me as I drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I arrived at Ethan's apartment complex to find my father's expensive black sedan already parked haphazardly near the entrance. The driver's side door was open, as if he had been in too much of a hurry to close it properly. I parked next to him and ran toward the building, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the entrance, I could hear my father's voice echoing in the stairwell. He was pounding on Ethan's door, demanding to be let in, his voice cracking with an emotion I had never heard from him before: fear. The scene that greeted me as I reached Ethan's floor was surreal. My father, always so composed and in control, was disheveled and frantic, his fist raised to pound on the door again. When he saw me, his expression shifted from panic to anger. "This is your fault," he hissed, jabbing a finger at my chest. "If you hadn't given away something that wasn't yours to give, we wouldn't be in this mess." Before I could respond, the door swung open to reveal Ethan, looking confused and irritated. Noah stood behind him, chocolate smudged at the corner of his mouth. The sight made my stomach drop. "What's going on?" Ethan demanded, blocking the doorway. "Dad, Rebecca, why are you both here? And why have you been calling nonstop?" My father pushed past him, making a beeline for Noah. "Where are the chocolates?" he asked, his voice tightly controlled but trembling with urgency. "How many has he eaten?" Ethan stepped between them, protective instincts flaring. "What the hell, Dad? They're just chocolates. Rebecca gave them to us." "The box," my father insisted, scanning the apartment frantically. "Where is the box?" Noah pointed to the coffee table, where the ornate wooden box sat open, at least a third of the chocolates missing. My father groaned, running his hands through his thinning hair. I approached Noah, kneeling to his level. "Hey, buddy," I said, fighting to keep my voice calm. "How many of those chocolates did you eat?" He thought for a moment, then held up 4 fingers. "4," he declared proudly. "They were super yummy. Dad had 3. 7 missing chocolates. 7 pills." My heart sank. "Would someone please explain what's happening?" Ethan demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin. My father and I exchanged glances, and I saw the warning in his eyes. But this wasn't about protecting him anymore. This was about Noah's safety. "Those chocolates," I began, ignoring my father's glare. "They weren't just chocolates. Dad put his heart medication inside them." Ethan's face went blank with incomprehension, then flooded with horror as understanding dawned. He spun toward Noah, examining him with newfound urgency. "Are you feeling okay, buddy? Any tummy ache? Dizziness?" Noah shook his head, seemingly unbothered, but I noticed a slight flush to his cheeks that hadn't been there when I first arrived. My father stepped forward, his voice low and insistent. "I need those chocolates back. All of them. Now." "Are you serious right now?" Ethan exploded, rounding on him. "You smuggled pills and chocolates and then let a child eat them? What kind of medication is it? How dangerous is it?" For a moment, my father seemed to deflate, the gravity of the situation finally hitting him. "It's a vasodilator," he admitted. "For my blood pressure and heart arrhythmia. Strong stuff. Adult dosage." Ethan didn't wait to hear more. He scooped up Noah and grabbed his keys. "We're going to the emergency room. Now." "No," my father protested, grabbing Ethan's arm. "They'll ask questions. They'll want to know how this happened." "I don't care," Ethan snarled, wrenching free. "My son's health comes first." I grabbed the chocolate box, knowing the hospital would need to know exactly what Noah had ingested. As we hurried toward the door, my father made one last desperate attempt. "Please," he begged, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. If this gets out, I'll lose my license. I'll lose everything." For the first time, I saw my father clearly. Not as the powerful, controlling figure who had dominated our lives, but as a desperate, selfish man willing to risk his own grandson's life to protect himself. "You already have," I said quietly, following Ethan out the door. The ride to the hospital was tense and silent except for my call to poison control, who instructed us to bring Noah in immediately. Although he wasn't showing severe symptoms yet, they explained that the medication could cause dangerous drops in blood pressure, especially in a child his size. In the emergency room, events unfolded with terrifying speed. Noah's blood pressure was already dropping when we arrived, and the medical team moved quickly, asking questions about what had ingested while preparing for a stomach-pumping procedure. I provided the chocolate box and explained the situation as truthfully as I could without mentioning the smuggling. I said my father had mistakenly mixed up his heart medication with chocolates he intended as a gift. The doctor looked skeptical but was more concerned with treatment than the full story. As they wheeled Noah away for the procedure, Ethan collapsed into a waiting room chair, his face in his hands. I sat beside him, placing a tentative hand on his shoulder, expecting him to shrug it off. Instead, he leaned into me, accepting the comfort I offered. My father paced the waiting room, alternating between checking his watch and peering down the hallway where Noah had disappeared. The silence between us was charged with unspoken accusations and fear. After what felt like hours, a doctor approached us with an update. The procedure had been successful, she explained. They had removed most of the undigested medication, and Noah's vital signs were stabilizing. He would need to stay overnight for observation, but they expected a full recovery. The relief was overwhelming. Ethan visibly sagged, tears streaming down his face. I found myself crying too, the tension of the day finally breaking. Even my father showed emotion, wiping his eyes quickly when he thought no one was looking. But our relief was short-lived. The doctor had more questions, her expression now stern and professional. She wanted to know exactly how heart medication had ended up inside chocolates given to a child. The way she phrased it made it clear she wasn't buying our initial explanation. Ethan looked to me, then to our father, his expression hardening. I watched the internal struggle play out on his face. Finally, he turned back to the doctor. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady. "I need to be completely honest with you." My father stepped forward, his hand gripping Ethan's arm. "Son," he warned. "Think carefully." Ethan shook him off, his decision made. "The truth," he told the doctor, "is that none of us knew the medication was in the chocolates. My father placed his prescription inside them without telling anyone, and my sister innocently gave them to me and my son." The doctor listened gravely, making notes. "And why?" she asked. Looking directly at my father, "Would you hide medication in chocolates?" The moment hung in the air between us, a turning point from which there would be no return. I saw my father calculating, trying to find a way out that wouldn't incriminate him. But there was none. In that hospital waiting room, surrounded by the consequences of his actions, the truth was finally exposed. My father had been smuggling medication from Mexico to avoid the high costs in the U.S. The revelation led to more questions, more explanations, and eventually, a visit from hospital security. As they escorted my father away for further questioning, I caught a glimpse of his face. Beyond the anger and indignation was something I'd never seen before: fear of losing control. For the first time in his life, Harold Miller couldn't buy, manipulate, or threaten his way out of the situation he had created. Ethan and I were allowed to see Noah, who was groggy but alert in his hospital bed. The sight of his small body connected to monitors and in 4 was heartbreaking. But his brave smile when he saw us was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. As we sat by his bedside, Ethan reached for my hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for being here, for telling the truth." I squeezed his hand in response, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. In the sterile quiet of that hospital room, something shifted between us. We were no longer just survivors of the same difficult childhood. We were allies, united in our determination to protect Noah from the toxic legacy our father had created. The crisis had forced a revelation that would change our family forever. But as I watched Noah drift off to sleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully, I knew that some revelations, painful as they might be, were necessary for healing to begin. The hospital waiting room became the stage for our family's final confrontation. After being questioned by hospital security, my father returned, his face a mask of cold fury. The authorities had released him temporarily, but made it clear that there would be further investigation. His medical license was already suspended pending review. Rather than showing remorse for endangering his grandson, he seemed fixated on the betrayal he felt at our hands. He paced the small area, his expensive loafers clicking against the linoleum floor, occasionally stopping to glare at Ethan or me. "You've ruined everything," he finally said, his voice low but vibrating with anger. 30 years building my practice, my reputation, all gone because you couldn't follow simple instructions. I stared at him in disbelief. "Simple instructions? You never gave any instructions. You sent me chocolates filled with prescription drugs without a word of warning." "I was going to pick them up next week," he countered. "They were never meant to be eaten. If you hadn't been so careless." "Careless?" Ethan interrupted, rising from his chair. His voice remained controlled, mindful of the public setting, but his eyes blazed. Your grandson is in a hospital bed because you smuggled drugs in a children's treat. And you're worried about your reputation. My father's face darkened. You don't understand the position I was in. Those medications cost thousands here. I was trying to help my patients who couldn't afford. Stop, I said, the words sharper than I intended. Just stop lying. This wasn't about helping patients. This was about profit, like everything else in your life. The truth of my words hung in the air between us. My father had always been careful to present his motivations as noble, his actions as necessary. But in that moment, the facade crumbled completely. You ungrateful children, he hissed, leaning closer. Everything I've done has been for this family. Who paid for your college, Rebecca? Who bailed out Ethan after Jessica's medical bills? I've given you everything. And this is how you repay me. Ethan stepped between us, his voice dangerously quiet. You've never given anything without expecting something in return. Every gift came with strings. Every favor with a price tag. My father scoffed. That's how the world works. Nothing is free. Family should be, I said simply. Something in my tone must have penetrated his anger because he paused, studying my face as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Whatever he saw there made him change tactics. Listen, he said, his voice softening into the persuasive tone I recognized from childhood, the one he used when trying to manipulate us. We can still fix this. The hospital doesn't have all the details. If we stick together, present a united front, say it was all a terrible misunderstanding. Ethan shook his head. No. No more lies. No more cover-ups. Noah could have died today. He's fine. My father dismissed. Kids are resilient. But my career won't survive this scandal unless you help me. The casual disregard for Noah's well-being was the final straw. Years of suppressed anger and hurt bubbled to the surface, and I found myself stepping forward, my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm me. Do you even hear yourself? I asked. Your grandson was poisoned by your illegal actions, and all you care about is your career, your reputation. My father's expression hardened. Don't be so dramatic, Rebecca. It was a simple mistake with fortunately minimal consequences. Now we need to focus on damage control. The only damage I'm concerned about, Ethan said, is the damage you've done to my son. And to us all these years. What followed was an eruption of long-buried truths. In that sterile hospital waiting room, with its faded magazines and uncomfortable chairs, decades of family secrets spilled out between us. Ethan revealed how our father had used his financial assistance after Jessica's death as leverage, constantly threatening to withdraw support if Ethan didn't comply with his wishes. I confessed how I'd been silently sending Ethan money to help him become less dependent on our father, trying to break the cycle of control. Most shocking was what we learned about our mother. My father, in his defensive rage, let slip that he had systematically alienated her, using his connections to challenge her visitation rights and spreading rumors in their social circle that damaged her reputation. He had effectively driven her away, then made us believe she had abandoned us. She tried to contact you both, he admitted during one particularly heated exchange. I intercepted her letters, her calls. She was unstable. Unfit to be your mother. That wasn't your decision to make, I said, my voice breaking. All those years of feeling abandoned, of wondering why our mother hadn't fought harder for us, it had all been based on lies. As our confrontation escalated, a hospital security guard approached, warning us to lower our voices or take our discussion elsewhere. The interruption provided a moment of clarity. This man, our father, had manipulated and controlled us our entire lives. He had lied, cheated, and now endangered an innocent child. And he showed no remorse. I'm done, Ethan said suddenly, his voice calm with finality. After Noah is released, I don't want you near him again. Not until you get help, recognize what you've done. My father's face contorted with rage. You can't keep my grandson from me. I have rights. You forfeited those rights when you put pills in his chocolates, I interjected. And if you try to use your money or influence to force your way back into his life, I'll go to the authorities myself with the full story of your smuggling operation." The threat hung between us, heavy with implication. My father stared at me, searching for any sign of weakness or bluff. Finding none, he changed tactics again. "Rebecca," he said, his voice suddenly gentle, reasonable. "You've always been the smart one. The practical one. Surely you can see that destroying our family over one mistake isn't the answer." It was the same voice he had used throughout my childhood to make me complicit in his schemes, to convince me that his way was the only way. But this time I saw through it. "This wasn't one mistake," I replied. "This was the culmination of a lifetime of manipulation and control. And the family was destroyed long ago, by you." My father's face drained of color. For the first time in my life, I saw him speechless, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. He reached for his wallet, an instinctive gesture I recognized. Money had always been his solution, his way of making problems disappear. "Don't," Ethan said, the words sharp as a blade. "You can't buy your way out of this one." A nurse appeared then, informing us that Noah was awake and asking for his dad. Ethan immediately moved to follow her, pausing only to look back at me with a question in his eyes. I nodded, understanding the unspoken request to join him. As we turned to leave, my father called after us, his voice strangely vulnerable. "What am I supposed to do now?" I looked back at him, this man who had loomed so large throughout my life, now diminished by the weight of his own actions. "For once in your life, take responsibility for what you've done. Without excuses. Without manipulation." We left him standing alone in the waiting room, a solitary figure against the backdrop of institutional beige walls. As we walked away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in his presence before: freedom. In Noah's hospital room, the contrast couldn't have been more stark. Despite the tubes and monitors, there was a warmth and authenticity in the space that had been absent in every interaction with our father. Noah's face lit up when he saw us, and the simple joy of that moment crystallized something in my heart. This was worth fighting for. This was what family should be. Not manipulation and control disguised as love, but genuine care with no strings attached. As Ethan sat on the edge of Noah's bed, helping him with a cup of water, I made a silent promise to them both. From this moment forward, I would protect them from my father's toxic influence, whatever it took. The family dynamics had exploded today, but from the ashes, something healthier could grow. For the first time since childhood, I felt the burden of my father's expectations and manipulations lifting from my shoulders. The revelation had been painful, the confrontation exhausting, but the clarity that emerged was worth every difficult moment. Looking at Ethan and Noah, I knew they felt it too. The first tentative steps toward healing a family broken not by today's crisis, but by years of control and deception. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is. The days following Noah's release from the hospital unfolded in a blur of practical decisions and emotional reckonings. Noah bounced back with the resilience of childhood, remembering the incident primarily as that time I got to ride in an ambulance, much to our relief. The physical danger had passed, but the reverberations through our family structure continued to intensify. As Ethan had predicted, there were questions. The hospital had filed a report with Child Protective Services, which triggered a police investigation into how prescription medication had ended up in chocolates accessible to a child. 2 detectives visited Ethan's apartment 3 days after the incident. Their questions direct but not accusatory. Ethan and I had spent hours discussing how to handle this exact scenario. We agreed to tell a version of the truth that protected Noah's well-being above all else, while not completely destroying our father's life. We explained that our father had been storing his medication in the chocolates temporarily during a move, had failed to inform me of this fact when he sent them as a gift, and that the entire incident was a terrible miscommunication with no malicious intent. The detectives seemed skeptical, but ultimately focused their concern on Noah's safety rather than pursuing criminal charges. They warned Ethan about the necessity of keeping all medications secure and out of children's reach, advice he accepted with appropriate seriousness. What we didn't mention was the international smuggling element of the story. That remained between us and our father, a card I held in reserve should he attempt to force his way back into our lives. My father, meanwhile, was engaging in a calculated campaign to re-establish control. It began with elaborate gifts arriving at both our doorsteps, a limited edition gaming console for Noah, an expensive leather portfolio for Ethan's restaurant work, and a white gold necklace for me. Each gift came with a card expressing remorse in carefully chosen words that accepted responsibility without admitting wrongdoing. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding," he wrote in my card. "I should have communicated better. Please don't let one mistake erase a lifetime of family bonds." The gifts remained unopened, the cards unacknowledged. 3 days later, he escalated to daily phone calls, leaving voicemails that grew increasingly desperate as neither Ethan nor I responded. By the end of the week, he had enlisted family friends to reach out on his behalf, each one recounting how distraught he was, how this separation was affecting his health. It was a masterclass in manipulation, one I had witnessed throughout my childhood but was only now fully recognizing for what it was. Each tactic was designed to provoke guilt, to make us question our boundaries, to draw us back into orbit around him. The final straw came when Ethan arrived home from work to find our father sitting in his living room, having convinced the building superintendent that he was there to surprise his son with apartment repairs. Noah, thankfully, had been at a play date with a school friend. Ethan called me immediately after ordering our father to leave, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. He had a key maid, Rebecca. He could have come in any time. That night, I drove back to Boston and helped Ethan pack essential belongings. By morning, they were settled temporarily in my Chicago apartment while we figured out next steps. The first of these was legal protection. The process of obtaining a restraining order against our own father felt surreal. But the family court judge took one look at the medical records from Noah's hospitalization and granted a temporary order immediately. The permanent hearing was scheduled for the following month. My father's response was swift and vindictive. Within days, Ethan received notice that the loan our father had given him to help with Jessica's medical bills was being called due immediately. The sum was substantial, nearly $50,000, money that Ethan had no way of repaying on short notice. When I checked my own finances, I discovered that my father had removed me as an authorized user on a credit card I'd had since college. Though I had my own financial independence now, the petty act of control spoke volumes about his mindset. "He's trying to force us back into dependency," I explained to Ethan as we sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by bills and legal papers. "If we're financially vulnerable, he thinks we'll have no choice but to accept his help and his conditions." Ethan ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I recognized from childhood. "What do we do? I can't repay that loan right now, and if he takes legal action..." The solution came from an unexpected quarter. My boss at the design firm, Harriet, had been sympathetic when I explained the family emergency that had pulled me away suddenly. When I returned to work and shared some details of our situation, she mentioned that the company was opening a satellite office in Denver and needed a senior designer to relocate and help establish the new branch. "It comes with a significant pay increase and relocation allowance," she told me. "I was going to post the position next week, but if you're interested..." The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Denver was far enough from both Boston and Chicago to make impromptu visits from my father difficult, yet still within a reasonable flight for Ethan's restaurant industry connections. The increased salary would allow me to help Ethan with his loan repayment, and the fresh start appealed to us both. Within 3 weeks, we had put my Chicago apartment on the market, found a 3-bedroom rental house in Denver with a fenced backyard for Noah to play in, and begun the process of transferring him to a new school. Ethan had reached out to restaurant contacts in the area and secured 2 promising interviews. Our father's attempts to contact us grew increasingly frantic as he realized we were serious about our separation. He left voicemails alternating between threats and pleas, sent emails with subject lines ranging from "You're making a terrible mistake" to "Please let me explain" to "This isn't legal. I'll fight this." We maintained our silence, communicating only through the lawyer we had hired to handle the restraining order and loan repayment negotiations. It was the healthiest boundary I had ever established with him. And though it was painful, it was also necessary. The day before our scheduled move, I received a text from an unknown number. It was from my mother, Marion. "Ethan reached out to me," it read. "Is it really true? Are you both finally free of him?" My hands shook as I called the number, hearing for the first time in nearly 15 years the voice that had once been my greatest comfort. Our conversation was tentative at first, then flowed more freely as we cautiously began rebuilding a connection I had thought was lost forever. She had rebuilt her life in Arizona, remarried to a kind man who taught high school science, and established a small but successful interior design business. She had tried to contact us countless times over the years, she explained, but our father had blocked her at every turn, eventually threatening legal action if she persisted. "I never stopped loving you both," she said, her voice breaking. "Never stopped hoping that someday you'd learn the truth." That night, as Ethan and I finished packing the last of our belongings, Noah already asleep in his temporary bed on my living room floor, I felt a sense of clarity I had never experienced before. We weren't just running away from our father's toxic influence. We were running towards something better, a chance to redefine family on our own terms. "Are we doing the right thing?" Ethan asked quietly, taping shut a box labeled "kitchen." I looked around at the dismantled apartment, at Noah's peaceful sleeping form, at the future waiting for us across state lines. "Yes," I said with conviction. "For the first time in our lives, I think we're doing exactly the right thing." The resistance had been difficult, the aftermath complex and ongoing. But as we prepared to leave behind the geographical center of our father's influence, I felt a weight lifting. The chocolates that had triggered this chain of events had been meant as a tool of control, a way for our father to use me as an unwitting accomplice. Instead, they had become the catalyst for our liberation. Tomorrow, we would drive west toward Denver, toward a new beginning. It wouldn't be easy, rebuilding our lives without the toxic foundation that had supported them for so long. But looking at Ethan and Noah, I knew with absolute certainty that we were stronger together than we had ever been under our father's thumb. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was truly ours to travel. 6 months after our move to Denver, life had settled into a rhythm that still sometimes felt surreal in its normalcy. Our rental house, situated in a quiet neighborhood with mountain views, had transformed from a collection of boxes and temporary furniture into a real home. Noah's room was painted a vibrant blue at his insistence, with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling that I had painstakingly arranged into accurate constellations. Ethan had secured a position as a sous chef at a well-regarded farm-to-table restaurant, where his talent for creating innovative dishes quickly earned him recognition. The hours were long but predictable, allowing him to be home for Noah most evenings. I had thrown myself into establishing the new design office, finding unexpected joy in building something from the ground up. Most importantly, Noah was thriving. The initial adjustment had been challenging, with nightmares about hospitals and worried questions about whether Grandpa was still mad at us. But children are remarkably resilient. And with the stability of our new routine and the support of a child therapist who specialized in family transitions, he had blossomed. His new school emphasized creative learning, and he had developed a particular interest in science experiments, often turning our kitchen into a laboratory of baking soda volcanoes and simple chemical reactions. Our father's presence, though physically distant, continued to cast occasional shadows. The restraining order had been made permanent after he failed to appear at the hearing, apparently realizing that the evidence of his actions with the medication would only damage his case. He had stopped calling directly but still sent occasional emails that vacillated between remorse and recrimination. We read them but rarely responded, maintaining the boundaries we had established. The loan situation had been resolved through our lawyer, with a structured repayment plan that was manageable with my increased salary. It would take years to fully repay. But the financial hold our father had over Ethan was significantly weakened. My relationship with my mother was cautiously rebuilding. We spoke on the phone weekly, each conversation peeling back another layer of the lost years. She and her husband had visited once, a weekend of tentative reconnection that left all of us emotionally exhausted but hopeful. Noah had taken to her immediately, instinctively recognizing the warmth that I had so desperately missed throughout my adolescence. As autumn turned the Colorado landscape into a blaze of gold and crimson, I began to recognize the subtle but profound changes in myself. The constant anxiety that had been my companion since childhood, the need to anticipate my father's moods, to plan my responses, to manage his expectations, had gradually receded. In its place grew a quiet confidence, a trust in my own perceptions and decisions that I had never fully experienced before. Therapy had been a crucial part of this journey. Both Ethan and I had committed to weekly sessions, individually at first and occasionally together. Our therapist, Dr. Landry, specialized in family trauma and had helped us understand the dynamics that had shaped our responses to our father's control. "What you're describing is a classic trauma bond," she explained during one particularly illuminating session. The alternating cycles of punishment and reward created a dependency that wasn't about love but survival. Breaking that pattern isn't just about physical distance, it's about recognizing and changing the internal narratives he installed. Those internal narratives had been powerful. That love was conditional on compliance, that family loyalty meant accepting control, that independence was a form of betrayal. Dismantling them required conscious effort and constant vigilance. There were days when guilt would overwhelm me, when the urge to respond to one of my father's particularly plaintive messages would become almost irresistible. On one such day, after receiving an email where he described his deteriorating health and loneliness, I called Dr. Landry in a state of distress. "He says his heart condition is worse," I explained, pacing my living room, "that the stress of our estrangement is killing him. What if it's true? What if he